Welcome to Target Market Insights, the multifamily and marketing podcast. Each week, John Kasman interviews multifamily and marketing experts to teach you how to find the best places to invest, attract investors, and grow your portfolio. You are listening to Target Market Insights with your host, John Kasman.
Welcome to Target Market Insights. I'm your host, John Kasman, and I want to thank you for joining us for what's going to be another great episode. Now, if you're enjoying this podcast, I need you to do me a favor and leave us a 5-star rating and review so other folks know the joy, the excitement, and more importantly, the great information you're getting from this podcast, and we can share with more people. Today's guest is Scott Krone. Scott is the founder of CODA Management Group. They team up with investors to purchase strategically located, undervalued warehouse spaces and convert them into climate-controlled self-storage facilities that are managed by a top 3 operator. Now, Scott has over 25 years of development and design experience. He's done over 47 syndications, and he's helped to control over 2,700 storage units under their management right now. Let's welcome to the show, Scott Krone.
John, great seeing you again. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, Scott. Absolutely. Scott, we got to meet probably a couple years back now, and I've really enjoyed watching kind of your growth and continue to build and do what you've been doing for quite some time now. For those folks who are not as familiar with you, why don't you give a little bit more context to your background?
Sure. We work out of the Chicago area, and in 1998, I began CODA as a development design and build firm. And at that point in time, we specialized in mostly residential, and we were converting older homes, but also tearing down homes and building new. And then we got into multifamily, as well as working with different churches and going into mixed use and condos and those sorts of things. And so when the crash came back in 08, 09, that really just dried up a lot of the housing market. And that's where we began focusing on multifamily and commercial, specifically apartments. And it was in 13 that I had a client that was interested in getting into distressed self-storage. And that's how I began looking into it. And I couldn't find one. I mean, everything in the down market, everything else was distressed, but self-storage was not. And as a developer, I mean, my background was in multifamily developments where, we were doing, any projects from 40 units to 400 units. I couldn't find a distressed self-storage facility anywhere. Maybe it was taking it from an 8.5 to an 8 cap or, something like that, but certainly not taking it, 20% occupied and underperforming and all that. And I told him as a developer, the best way to make money in real estate is to develop. And so if he really wanted to get into the self-storage play, that it involved development. And so we found a property that we had a client that we were going to do a design build for, and we lost the mayor's support in terms of the zoning. And I called up my client and said, I might have the perfect building for you. I'm not familiar enough with self-storage to tell you, but it's a big empty warehouse. And they came and looked at it and determined it was great. They said, we don't have anyone to build it. I said, well, we'll build it for you. And so we got them the entitlements. We wholesaled them the deal. We built out a portion of it. We kept a portion of it. We rented that. And then the whole thing was flipped to a self-storage company when we were done with it. So that was my introduction to self-storage. And since that point in time, we've now expanded from Chicago. We're throughout the Midwest. We're in Wisconsin, Illinois, and Ohio. And looking to expand into the Kentucky and Michigan, and we're looking at a property in North Carolina right now.
All right, so Scott, you basically what you said there was you're focusing on distressed self-storage opportunities. That's kind of where you started coming in, looking for a place, couldn't really find one that existed, and then you came across that one property that was a fit. You hit on a couple of things. I want to hear a little bit more about the model that you said. You said that you go into the empty warehouse, you built that out, and then you basically sold that to another self-storage operator. Is that the model, or is that kind of the same model that you typically follow now?
That was the model. So right now we're not just looking at warehouses, we're looking at any commercial building. And it needs to, I can't say any. So, we're looking between 70 and 110,000 square feet. And we're looking to make more urban markets rather than rural or suburban markets. We're looking at areas that offer PACE financing. We're looking at areas that offer the opportunity to use opportunity zones. And so when we can find a building that meets those criteria, then we will convert that into self-storage, and then we hold it and we retain it. And as you said in your introduction, we hire CubeSmart to manage our facility. So we're real estate developers, but we're not self-storage operators, but we hire CubeSmart to manage them for us.
Yeah, so for me, or for other folks who maybe aren't as familiar with self-storage, what I find very interesting, just at a high level real estate perspective, you find these opportunities to reposition, develop an empty space or kind of this blank canvas, right? So you come in, you take over this warehouse or this commercial space, you develop it into the self-storage facility, and then you kind of have an end user with CubeSmart where you sell it to them, they kind of take it on, and you already have a buyer in place. I mean, in some ways, this is like the best of flipping, the best of wholesaling, having kind of that end buyer in place, coming in with a development plan and being able to execute. There's a lot to like about the strategy at a high level. So just understanding real estate at a high level, you can see some of the opportunities of what is appealing to what you're doing. What are some of the risk involved in that, though?
Well, I mean, it's real estate, right? So there's always risk, and otherwise everybody would be doing it, and there's barriers to entry. So the predominant risk within it is the lead time, right? So you're looking at a 3 to 5 year investment, and you're going into it. And the biggest risk to self-storage is competition. It's not the market, it's not the economy, it's how much other self-storage operators are going to be able to operate within your territory. In your territory, not by as a purchase, but by buying power of your clients, is 3 to 5 miles. Most people are not going to want to drive more than 5 miles to go to a self-storage facility. So if you have too much competition within those concentric rings, then that's going to impact your pricing. It's going to impact your occupancy and all those sorts of things. So the biggest barrier, the biggest risk is how much other competition can come into the marketplace during that period of time.
And how do you try to find that out, right? I mean, is there a resource you go to, or are you simply monitoring what other development plans are there, or what do you look for to kind of identify how much competition there is within that 3 to 5 mile radius?
Well, the first thing we do is we put up a big barbed wire fence all the way around it and make sure that no one can get in there. But the reality is there are experts out there that are feasibility consultants, and we retain them before we even buy. And so they can provide us with metrics, not just in terms of how much demand and supply there currently is, but what is the median income, what is the demographics. So we really study the demographics and whittle down deeply into who our buyer is. And so the metric is where supply equals demand in terms of your basic economic supply and demand graph is square feet of lockers per capita. And when you're at 7 square feet of lockers per capita, that is typically where market saturation is. So, if you go above it, it's going to take longer to lease up. You're going to have less income, and you're going to have to give more discounts, those sorts of things. If you're below that, then you should be able to lease up well, solidly and aggressively. Typically, it's 3% per month. So to fill up a building would take about 3 years, which is the same as a new development for apartments. But if you're above that, then it's going to slow down to less than 3% a month. And so we are looking at, where we stand in relationship to that 7. So if you pretty much told me any location in Florida, it's going to be above 7. People call me up and say, "Oh, I got this perfect site for self-storage. There's nothing around it." And I'll go into Google Maps and I will just do a quick look. And there's like 18 facilities in 3 miles. And, I'll call them back and I'm like, "I'm pretty sure we're going to be above 7. We'll get a basic, quick down and dirty from our feasibility consultants. And they're like, "Yeah, they're at 9. And we won't even begin pursuing it any further." Now in the South, like Florida, Texas, being at 9 is now become the new average. But for most markets, it's around 7. Like before, New York City was the only market that was really at 9 and healthy. Other areas, because there's a lot more population growth in those, they're getting up to about 9, specifically like Florida and on the East Coast and Texas. So in the markets that we're in, we want to be well below 7. So if we go into a market that we're like 2, 2.5, or 3, we know that we have a lot of protection. Now, the other thing that does protect it is zoning. Zoning is a big barrier to entry. And so, a lot of the facilities, like we've been working in Toledo and Dayton, both of those facilities were zoned as of right. And so, there are other risks. Like, for instance, you never know how a municipality is going to react, and we have to work through those. Like, we've been currently facing a little bit of challenges with the city of Dayton, just because even though it's zoned as of right, the powers that be have just told me they just didn't want it. They didn't want it there. They wanted something else. And I'm like, well, your planning says it's allowed. So, we're doing what we're legally entitled to do. And there's demand. We can show that there's demand for it. So it will be a viable contributing business to the community.
Yeah, and you talked about kind of the city officials. I do want to talk about that a little bit. But before we do, I want to hit on kind of what you started talking about with the trends and the population. So you mentioned in Florida, it's pretty much known that you're going to have higher than that. That's 7 lockers per square, or 7 square feet of lockers, per capita, right? So as you look at market trends, as you think about where growth is happening, from a multifamily standpoint, we're always looking to see where are people moving to, where the job's going, is it easy to do business, factors like that. As you think about population growth and migration trends and things like that, the folks who actually need self-storage units, what kind of data points from a population or a demographic perspective are you looking into?
Well, it depends on the market. So the median income really dictates that first. So let's take the areas that are more urban. So the biggest factors of why people don't need self-storage, there are 3 main reasons why. They're basements, attics, and garages. And so when you have those places where you can throw your stuff when you're not using it, so let's say your skis during the summer, or your Christmas tree during the summer, or your winter clothes during the off seasons and all those sorts of things. People need places. And as people are moving into the city to downsize, or the millennials are not as willing to buy new homes or larger homes, they're looking to maintain, there's a premium for where do I put my stuff when I don't use it? And so what we look at is that the median income. So is the lower the median income, there's a higher premium per square foot to pay for smaller units. And so in our communities, which are more affluent, we'll have big ones. And that's because they'll come in and rent like 9 spaces that are 10 by 20 at one time for 9 months, because they're remodeling their house and they're taking out all their stuff out of their house. They're hiring a moving company, and they come in and they literally will pack the lockers. Every cubic inch is filled completely. Others will use it like for businesses. Businesses in the downtown area will use it just to keep files or extra materials, supplies, and those sorts of things. So there's 2 really factors in the urban market. One is the commercial, and the other one is the residents. And as more and more people are looking to restrict or reduce the amount of space that they have to don't have to keep up, that's where self-storage is becoming a premium, and why it's a need in these communities. Like in Dayton, when I was talking to the city officials, I was like, there's a tremendous amount of development going all around here. And there's townhomes, condos, apartments, all being built within a quarter mile of our building. And the original developers who owned our building wanted to make the building apartments, but they couldn't because the building had no parking. The building is literally the square footage of the site, and the column layout in the basement did not align itself to accommodate for parking. So they couldn't physically get cars down there. So there's a restricted amount of uses that you can possibly put in the building. The building's been vacant for an incredibly long period of time. As you know, downtown Dayton, it was suffering, but now it's booming. And that's why there's a need for self-storage in that market.
That was great tips there and great information to help us identify, some of those metrics and some of those things that you're looking into. Speaking of the city officials, right? You've mentioned before some of the financing opportunities and kind of working with government officials to get permitting and just to kind of really get it zoned properly. Walk us through some of those steps to kind of connect with the government officials to both just get approval to move forward with your plan, but then also try to see if you can get some of those public funds that are available for some of these renovations and this build out.
Well, two different things. In one, there's if the property is zoned as of right. So the first thing we always go and look at is what does the current zoning allow? And so, the ones that we have done recently, self-storage was an allowable use. But like when we bought the building in Wisconsin, they issued us a certificate of occupancy for self-storage even before we bought the building. 3 months after we bought the building, we got a letter from Milwaukee saying, you don't have your zoning. And I called them up and I said, what do you mean we don't have our zoning? They said, well, we changed the definition and we changed it a week before we gave you the C of O. The person didn't know it. So they gave you the certificate of occupancy in error. I'm like, well, we closed on this building with the knowledge that we had this C of O. And how did it change? Because the building was storage before we bought it. We're just making it self-storage. And they said, well, we changed the definition between storage and self-storage because there's so much self-storage going on. So we had to rezone that building. And so we obviously went back and said, hey, well, based upon its historic use, we actually have received historic tax credits of $1.5 million for the building. And the building is now on the National Historic Preservation as a national landmark. So, there's Yosemite, there's the Grand Canyon, and then there's our building in Wisconsin. So it's going to be a national park. We will charge $5 if you want to come and see the park. We will not have the green guys with their hats. But so in that sense, that was a little bit different. In other communities where they were really struggling for development, they actually told us to write the zoning for them, in which I've never been asked to do in 30 years. And so we modeled it after what the county would allow for that. And so this community recognized that their zoning was outdated and they needed to update it. In Toledo and Dayton, the buildings were zoned for that. So we went in and, we made sure that we had the zoning, and then we, submitted building permits to show what we were doing and getting that process. In Dayton, we actually met with the city officials beforehand, before we submitted for a building permit, just to make sure that they knew what we were doing, what we wanted to do with the building. And they made their comments, and we adjusted what we were actually going to do based upon those comments, and then we submitted. So we began that process in March or April, and we submitted for building permit, and we didn't get the permit until November. And so during that period of time, that's as of right. So that wasn't changing any zoning or doing anything. That was just getting the building permit. It took that long. With respect to public funding, we have not taken a single dollar of taxpayer money for the financing. So we're not doing TIFs. We're not doing anything along those lines. The entity that we're using is called PACE Financing, which is through a federal program through the Department of Energy. And it's administered locally through the states because it gets applied to the real estate taxes. And so that is a program that we've implemented both in Toledo and we're trying to do it in Dayton. And right now, Dayton we're working through that with them in terms of because of the fact that we have a privately funded PACE program. But in Toledo, we were the first privately funded PACE program as well as Opportunity Zone in all of Ohio. We were the only ones that combined both of those entities. And that's what we're working on here in Dayton as well.
Talk a little bit more about the PACE financing. You said it's a federal program that's really implemented on the local level. Is that local from a county perspective? Is it city? And what do you kind of have to do to qualify for PACE financing?
Well, again, it's not an economic development tool. It's an energy efficiency tool. So the federal government, in terms of reducing carbon emissions, in terms of reducing consumption of natural resources, they're encouraging building owners to improve the overall level of efficiency. And in doing so, they want to provide economic stimulus package. And that package gets applied and administered through the local port authority. and then apply to the real estate taxes. And so if I go in and put $100,000 worth of energy improvements into the building, and I have an energy audit done prior, and then we can show how much we're going to be improving the efficiency of the building, then that $100,000 qualifies under the PACE program. And so that money that is then given to me in the form of a loan gets amortized over the lifespan of the improvement, and then it gets applied to my real estate taxes as a special assessment. Excuse me. So it's a debt instrument that is viewed as equity because it's above the line item. It's included in your property taxes. And so, yes, it does impact your NOI, but as a result of it, the lenders view it as equity, not debt. And so you can create a better capital stack.
And does all of that need to happen kind of before you start the energy efficiency renovations, or is that something that you can retrofit?
Well, you have to do it before you pay things out. So you have to get the approvals that what you're planning on doing is going to meet the standards. And so the building in Dayton, it had been empty for 40 years. I mean, it didn't even have power. We had to restore power. So we're putting on a new roof. We're putting roof insulation in there. We're bringing new high energy efficiency lights. We're putting in, obviously, a new HVAC system. It had a boiler that was, more than 40 years old. Elevators, window fenestrations, all those sorts of things all apply towards energy efficiency, even if we were getting into more high use for plumbing, water consumption, and also heating the water. I mean, we have 3 toilets. I mean, we're not getting into high water usage, so that side doesn't really apply for us. But those are the types of things that you can get into that, even like your apartment buildings, your structures that you're doing, if you're going to look into make improvements to them, you could utilize the PACE tool. Like, for instance, Illinois has approved PACE, but the city of Chicago just recently began allowing it. So Illinois was not considered a PACE-friendly state. Ohio has historically been known as a PACE-friendly program. And it'd be a real shame to see that if they discontinued it, because it's bringing a lot of investment dollars into the community, hundreds of millions of dollars into the community. So those are some benefits of why people do it. And those are the states that we're actively looking for. So like Indiana just does not allow PACE at all.
No, and I think that's great points, right? So as you think about ways to stimulate growth, or, even as we're looking at different deals and opportunities, that's something else that investors should be considering. If you're doing an apartment complex, and if you're going to do a large efficiency play, maybe you're going to replace all the toilets with low flow toilets, replacing the shower heads, replacing some of the light fixtures and things like that. It may be an opportunity to see if the PACE program is going to be a benefit for you. So sounds like there's some great information to look into more on PACE. We'll put a link to that as well in our show notes. So let's talk a little bit more about kind of, some of the markets that you're in, right? You started talking about, why you like Ohio, and Illinois is, has now started to accept it in Chicago. And then I think earlier you mentioned a few different markets. You talked about Wisconsin. I believe you talked about Kentucky and a few other places. What's kind of the rhyme or reason? Are you really focused on the Midwest, or what exactly is driving kind of your approach when you look at different markets to expand?
We're looking at the Midwest because of the low typical saturation of self-storage. And then the next layer is we're looking at areas where there is an upward trend in growth. And then we also look at, are they PACE qualified states? And then are they also in opportunity zones? So our position on opportunity zones is they're a great tool to enhance. They're not a great tool for their only reason to buy. So the fact that we created the 2 zones was we were already going to buy the building no matter what. And then we found out that the buildings were in the zones. And so it added another layer of benefit to our investors. And that's our strategy, is how we can add additional layers of improvement to our investors. And so those are our main criteria of why we're looking in those areas. There are other hot markets, like Texas and Florida are extremely hot markets, but that's when we look and say, okay, there's already a heavy demand, a heavy supply of self-storage in those markets, and which is one reason why we're not looking to go and have those battles. We don't look to battle. We look to go in, get our job done, and do it well and serve the community.
So you've also, I mean, you're building out all these units, right? So when you go to Wisconsin or you go to Ohio or some of these other markets, how do you manage the construction? I mean, do you have like a set team or kind of a lead project manager or a lead general contractor who kind of runs that, or you work with different teams in each local market?
Yeah, we have two companies. So CODA Management Group is the investment side, and then CODA Design Build is our developer design build firm that we own and operate as well. So we do all of the construction through CODA Design Build. So the way in which we do it, our director of construction administers it, and then we hire a local project manager to run it on site for us. And so all of the bidding, all of the negotiations, all of the scope of works are all created based upon our experience, and we just have someone locally on site making sure that it's getting implemented the way in which we want. And we've utilized our national network. We're part of a nationwide organization that has like 35,000 investors in it, and all real estate investors. And we will just say, hey, look, we're going into this market. We're going into Dayton. Who are the Dayton people? Who are the people we need to talk with? Who are the people that we need to meet? Does anybody have any recommendations as to whom we can hire to run our jobs? And that's how we go into these markets.
No, it's awesome. It's great to have that kind of resource too, because I mean, that is a challenge for most people when they're looking in other markets, is putting the boots on the ground, right? Getting that team in place that can lead and execute and maintain the quality and the expectations that you have on the projects where maybe your local team is leading it, where you're based. So that's great to have that network. Do you have any tips for maybe someone who doesn't have the resources to reach out to that wide of a database if they were looking to do, whether it be a smaller rehab or smaller project in another market? Do you have any tips of things that they should consider to help either hire the right people or at least manage the process from afar?
Well, the first thing I would say is going into a market that you're not locally done. If this is your first, second, or even 10th project, I'd caution you about it, just because if there's a problem, I'm a 5-hour drive away, right? To Dayton. Toledo's about 4 hours. Can I get there in a day? Sure. But it's not like I can go 20 minutes down the street or an hour down the street, right? So I would not recommend it for your first go around. And then once you have developed and built a track record and you're looking to expand because you want to get into it, the way in which we do it is, if we didn't have those markets, the other thing that our director does is, when we begin identifying, and part of our due diligence of the building is, we will drive that market. Okay. And we will drive, and people say drive for dollars. We will drive for subcontractors. So we're driving around to other job sites and we're writing down the names of whose vans are parked outside of it. So we're building a subcontractor base of knowledge, right? And so we're going in and we're trying to find out who are the good subcontractors, because the good ones are working in this economy, right? I mean, if you're not working in this economy right now, then that's a problem. I mean, something else is going on in your business that you really need to evaluate, because except for '07, this has been the longest growth period that we've had, or the strongest market. So, labor shortage is a huge problem in construction right now. Skilled labor is a huge problem because there's so much going on. So we go into these and then we call them up and we say, we're under contract for this. We have the job. So a lot of times people are like, well, I don't want to do the bid if I don't know you're going to have the job. If you're just a GC, how do I know you're actually going to be the one building it? And we say, well, because we own it. We own the property. So not only are we the owners, but we're the builder, right? So that takes away people's fear that they already know, like, instead of, I'm bidding against 3 other guys to get the subcontractor, and then the contractor's bidding against 3 other general contractors to see if I'm going to get it. That's a lot of risk. But if they know that they have like a 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 shot of getting the job, then they're more than likely going to give us a good bid. And so that's where we work. And then we also talk with the local person that we hire and saying, who have you enjoyed working in the past? And so we're building those teams, we're building those circles. And then when we go in with PACE, then we're also talking to the local PACE, because you have to get that energy audit. And so we're asking them, who do they like working with, or who have they had experience with? So in each of these cases, we're relying upon that network in order to expand our base, so that when we begin hiring these people, we already have like 2 or 3 points of contact. And if I just drove up and then opened up the yellow pages and tried calling people, but I didn't have those points of contacts, it'd be that much harder.
That's a powerful tip, driving for subcontractors. What a great concept, great idea. I've heard people talk about driving to rehab or construction sites and hiring a GC, but not so much going a layer below that to say just really looking for those subcontractors, looking for the team members that you need if you're going to GC the project yourself, or if you're just looking for specific skills. That's a great way to go out there and identify who's working. Probably you could even, peek in and take a look at the work and see what's going on and, get a read there. But definitely really talking to the local people, whether it's that pays contact, whether it's an inspector, whether it's someone else who's local, who's going to have connections and who will tell you who does a pretty good job and who's obviously working, but then also taking a look and seeing the kind of work that they're doing. It's a great way to build that connection up.
You have to be careful when you go on the job site because they think that you're like some sort of inspector or trying to shut them down.
You got to be careful when you go on, and definitely be clear and figure out who you want to talk to. So,
that's right.
All right, Scott, are you ready for a bullseye round?
Absolutely.
Give me an apparent failure that set you up for later success.
Not picking the right business partner. I got into a situation with a business partner where, let's just say that we had a difference in opinion on how the money should be allocated and dispersed. And so that has caused a lot of pain, but it has also set me up in terms of what are the proper systems we have to have in place within our business, how we can grow the business. And it was through that we've been able to expand beyond just a local city company into a regional company.
What is the book you've recommended or gifted the most in the last year?
The Road Back to You by Ian Morgan Krone. No relationship, so I'm not getting any royalties off this. It's Krohn, and it is a concept. There's also a book that is a little bit more in depth called The Sacred Enneagram. And it's this concept of the Enneagram that these 4th century monks came up with. And these guys were brilliant. I don't know how they did it, but it breaks everyone's personality down into 9 personalities, and they're either healthy or unhealthy, and how they interact and relate to everyone. And so that is a tool that we've not only implemented within our business, but also how we can better relate to our customers and our clients in terms of the design build side of things, so that we can alter the way in which we communicate to be more effective.
All right, give me a digital or mobile resource you recommend for your business.
The one we've utilized the most recently right now is HubSpot in terms of our contact relationship manager. As we've grown and expanded, we also have SonicWall, which is we have our own internal cloud, but we were able to utilize that tool so that the people that we need to can access our files anywhere in the world. And those 2 things have been absolutely paramount to our growth.
What is a daily habit that helps you stay focused on your goals?
It's going to seem real simple, but every day my wife and I walk the beach. I live 3 blocks from Lake Michigan, and even we try to do it in the winter, like when it's below 0 or freezing. Like today, which is too treacherous with ice. But we will walk it, and then in the summer, so basically between May through the end of October, we will paddleboard. And just being out on the lake and calming one's mind and just letting, I'm just going to say, letting God speak to me so I can just hear what's going on and get me refocused and knowing what I have to do. It's a great 45 minutes away to get myself right before I go into the day.
I love that. That's a great one. I can visualize that too. And that's a powerful one. I like that a lot. All right. What's one thing you know now that you wish you knew when you were starting out?
If I had known that, I probably wouldn't have started out. Starting out at the age of 28, your own business. I don't know if that was either incredible gutsy or stupidity at this point in time. I think if I had known all that I know now, I probably would not have done it, just because of not knowing the inherent risks. I think when you're 28 or 30 or even 35, you're sort of immune to risk. I look at my son right now, and if he wants to buy a motorcycle, I'm thinking, look at all the risk you're taking. And so I think that's a big factor is how to mitigate risk is the biggest thing.
What advice would you give to a smart-driven college student about the real world?
Well, it's something that I say quite frequently, and it's a combination of recognizing a willingness to learn and grow doesn't stop at college. You have to be able to grow and expand and continue to develop. And that's something that my mentor has really instilled in me through my professional career. I mean, a lot of times people say, well, why don't you just keep doing the thing that you're doing? I'm like, look at the market. The market has changed dramatically. There's been major shifts in the market, and I just wouldn't be able to continue doing those things. So if we're not adaptable, if we're not looking to how to improve, how to expand, then we're going to be stagnant. And so I would always encourage them to continue to grow.
What are you curious about right now?
I am most curious as to further understand how I can better utilize the tool of the Enneagram in my own life and my own faith, and seeing how I can improve the way in which I can communicate. So I think that is one, as I continue to develop in our business, I'm getting less and less hands-on in terms of the day-to-day operation. And it's more of being able to communicate those goals and down to the different levels. So right now we have, 4 levels of operations in our business. And as we continue to expand, it's going to grow even more than that. So those are the areas that I need to continue to grow in, is developing that leadership, developing those communication skills.
All right, Scott, we've talked a little about Chicago and Illinois, and we have not talked about food. So I want to know from you, give me the best place to grab a bite out your way.
Well, I think it really depends. I mean, if you're into pizza, I'm going to have to say Malnati's, because I've known them since I was in high school. So Lou Malnati's Pizza, Rick and Mark do a great job of continuing their father's lineage, and they've expanded. They were just bought out by a PE firm out of New York. So they're going to be going national-wide pretty soon. I think there's a lot. I always enjoy finding local, like hole-in-the-wall type places that you wouldn't find anywhere else. So chains are fine when you need to get something quick, but we always like looking for local little establishments. So there's quite a few of here in the North Shore area that we've, like Carson's Ribs is a good one that our team enjoys going to and stuff like that. But I think the first thing I ask people is, what type of food are you looking for? And we try to focus it down.
You gave 2 great ones, Lou Malnati's and Carson's Ribs. It's interesting anytime we talk to people who grew up in the Chicagoland area, and there's a debate between, Giordano's, Lou Malnati's, and some of the other ones. And I tend to think that folks who grew up in the area really prefer Lou Malnati's pizza, and Giordano's has a bigger name, right? But I feel like Lou Malnati's is the one that people really, really feel affectionate about locally. So.
Yeah.
And there are more as well. I don't want to leave anybody out. There's definitely a few other big players there, but yeah, that's good. Well, listen, this has been a lot of fun and very educational. I really appreciate you taking a minute to walk us through some of the things that you're working on, helping us understand kind of the types of numbers you look at, in particular demographic trends, how many, I think we talked about square foot, lockers per square foot per capita, if I said that right. But really just helping us understand more about what to look for, and then the pace financials, the pace opportunities that's out there. Really being able to look into some of that to maybe offset some of the expenses or get those tax credits. So lots of great information for our listeners on this episode. For folks who want to learn more about whether it's investing with you or some of the different projects you all are doing, or even just more about self-storage in general, what is the best way for them to reach out?
Our website is CODA, CODA, MG as a management group.com. So CODAMG.com. There's a link on there that will get information off to us. And then either myself or our director of sales and acquisitions, Martin, can get hold of you.
Sounds good. Scott, thank you again for coming on Target Market Insights. We hope you have a great day. We'll talk again soon.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.